January 23rd, 2011. The AFC Championship game is in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers would defeat the Jets in a close one. 24 points for the Steelers, 19 for the Jets, and Big Ben heads to his third Super Bowl in 5 years. It may have been tough to come to the doorstep of the Super Bowl and be rejected, but for the Jets, at this time, there was hope. Hope that the future would be far different from the past. There was belief and gratitude in New York. Not a day where wearing green was a bad look. New Yorkers and New Jerseyans were joined together, but the future they thought to be a bright one turned into the one we know now. That AFC Championship game was 12 years ago. The iPhone 4 had just come out, Firework by Katy Perry was at the top of the charts, and Instagram was only 4 months old. Once you know what it feels like to be at the bottom, you realize how hard it is to reach the top, but you don't think about it when you're there. In other words, you really don't know the value of a moment until it's gone. There's been many playoff droughts all across the major sports leagues. Now the Jets hold the longest drought out of any team from any sport. A look back at those years are filled with the classic what ifs. What if we drafted him instead of him? What if we traded for him instead of him? All the moves and the mistakes that make up the 12-year absence of being a relevant NFL team. First, we have to take a look at where it all started, or in this case, stopped. The 2010 Jets consisted of many talented names, but those names may have slipped from your memories as the years have passed. The coach, the leader of these men, was none other than NFL journeyman and bloodline Rex Ryan. After winning multiple playoff games and a championship with the Ravens, Ryan was in just his second season with the Jets and making some pretty good headlines. Now on to the names on the back of the jerseys, the guys who laid it all out. Quarterback Mark Sanchez, who was just in his second year as well. The versatile weapon and Hall of Famer, the one and only LT. LaDainian Tomlinson was there to lead the charge at running back, along with Sean Green and the late Joe McKnight, who was looking like a rising star, gone too soon. Rest in peace, Joe. Steelers Super Bowl hero Santonio Holmes, longtime veterans Jericho Cotchery and big body Braylon Edwards all led the wide receiver group. Remember the greatest name in NFL history that's been a meme forever? DeBrickashaw Ferguson? He was also a part of this group. Tight end Dustin Keller, now NFL analysts Damian Woody and Bart Scott, and the legendary duo of Antonio Cromartie and Hall of Famer Darrelle Revis at corner. This team was loaded, and those were just a few of the dominant players on the roster. It was a team full of veterans and smart football players who've established a role for themselves in the league. The Jets would roll to 9-2 on the year and ultimately finish up 11-5. In Peyton Manning's last playoff game as a Colt, the Jets would escape with a narrow 17-16 victory, leaning on their defense and the leg of Nick Folk as time expired to send them to the divisional round. It wasn't just any playoff game though. The Jets would face off against their division rival and then 3-time Super Bowl champion Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. In one of the most improbable playoff victories from the 21st century, the Jets would walk away with smiles, not knowing that it would be their last for years to come. The season after, Braylon Edwards and Jericho Cotchery would be let go, and the Jets would bring in Plexico Burress to fill in the void. The offseason didn't consist of any intriguing moves. During the draft though, some familiar names like Muhammad Wilkerson, Bilal Powell, and Jeremy Curley would join the squad. The Jets had high expectations going into the season opener, and they seemed to pick up where they left off, starting 2-0 with both games at MetLife. However, the Jets would drop 3 straight games on the road, and this would prove to be the only constant for the Jets: inconsistency. Their ability to put together full games would fluctuate throughout the year. They would handle teams like Jacksonville, Kansas City, and Washington, but they would also have games where they'd get blown out by New England and Philly. It just wasn't the same team as the year prior. They managed to finish 8-8, but would ultimately miss the playoffs. Fast forward to 2012, LaDainian Tomlinson would officially retire. Plexico Burress would leave for Pittsburgh along with other departures. The Jets were underwhelming to say the least. It was once again a season filled with false hope, but overall just more bad play by the team. Mark Sanchez had one of his worst years, and they'd finish the season 6-10. In 2013, Jets legend Darrelle Revis would leave to join Tampa Bay, and Mark Sanchez would suffer a season-ending shoulder injury during the preseason. That opened the door for second-round pick from West Virginia, Geno Smith. This season, however, the Jets were actually better with Geno Smith. They finished 8-8, missed the playoffs, and once again, it looked somewhat promising. The Jets would roll with Geno Smith the following year, but it was nothing like we expected. Smith struggled, and the Jets had to start 34-year-old Michael Vick at times, which wouldn't be enough to mask the 100 other problems that they had. But then 2015 came. Rex Ryan was out, and Todd Bowles was in. Fan favorite Ryan Fitzpatrick was brought in. Wide receiver Brandon Marshall would sign a deal to be paired with Eric Decker, and the cornerback duo of Revis and Cromartie were back. This really seemed to be one of the best teams that the Jets had, maybe even better than the one that they went to the AFC Championship game with. The season was filled with ups and downs, but it was clear that the Jets were a good team. They shocked the NFL with a win over New England late in the season, and during the last week, all they had to do was beat the 7-8 Buffalo Bills. But there was just one problem. Their head coach was none other than Rex Ryan. The former friend turned enemy would reign supreme, and they missed the playoffs once again. 2016 was just another setback after a seemingly quiet comeback. Fitzpatrick was underwhelming along with the team, and they missed the postseason. 2017 was that weird Josh McCown year where he actually kind of balled, throwing to Jermaine Kearse and Robbie Anderson. 2018 was Sam Darnold, and yeah, the rest is history. 2019, Sam Darnold would be joined by Adam Gase, and nothing would change. 2020, the Jets would start 0-13, and the Sam Darnold era was officially over. Then, just 2 years ago, things seemed to be trending upward as the Jets would draft quarterback Zach Wilson out of BYU and bring in 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Sala to be their head coach. New York would also sign guys like Corey Davis, draft Elijah Moore from Ole Miss along with other moves. They closed off the season with a 4-13 record, but it felt like the culture would change. This past season, the Jets would nail the draft. Cornerback Sauce Gardner played like an all-pro and would win Defensive Rookie of the Year along with Garrett Wilson, who would win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And running back Breece Hall would put up numbers before his unfortunate ACL tear. There was one problem, however, and it seems to be a continuous problem for the Jets: the quarterback. Zach Wilson played terrible. In fact, that's being generous. I'll never forget coming back from the Thursday night game against Jacksonville, and some Jets reporter was on the radio, and it was just filled with callers saying, that was it. This was the last straw, and I knew right then and there, Zach Wilson just lost the fan base of New York. It was a rough season as they started off 7-4, and then surprisingly dropped 6 straight games and missed the playoffs again. So after years of scrutiny, pain, false hope, multiple quarterbacks and coaches, there's finally something to actually be excited about. In sports, age is just a number. Tom Brady won a Super Bowl at 43, and after years in Green Bay, the 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers has just been traded to the Jets as I write this. An absolute blockbuster that's been long awaited since the news broke that he intended to play for them. As you're watching this, the news has been going around the sports world for a few days now, and even though it was expected, we're still going to have to wait and see because these things are never a sure thing. Brady won a Super Bowl in his first year with the Bucs, but Brett Favre fell flat on his face with the Jets. Russell Wilson was insufferable with Denver, but I do not think that we're in for a disappointment. Because of how Robert Sala and company have built this roster over the past 2 years, New York has been slowly emerging out of the shadows, and this is how their new look team can bring them a championship. Aaron Rodgers has played with guys like Clay Matthews, Julius Peppers, BJ Raji, Mike Daniels, Sam Shields, Tramon Williams, Charles Woodson. The list goes on and on. He knows what great defensive talent can do for a football team. It truly changes everything. The difference between an okay defense and a really good defense is night and day in the NFL, because this is a sport where one play can change the momentum of a game. One turnover, one sack, you name it. The Jets defense was ranked 4th last year in terms of yards allowed and allowed 18.6 points per game despite having to suffer through some of the worst quarterback play all season. As we know, good defenses are built up front, but this defense is talented at every position group and is blessed with a great scheme from Sala. Aaron Rodgers is going from Kenny Clark to Quinnen Williams, Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary to Carl Lawson and John Franklin Myers, and Jermaine Johnson, from Quay Walker and Devondre Campbell to CJ Mosley and Quincy Williams. The front 7 is stacked, and I think from a consistency standpoint, they're better than Green Bay. Rodgers is going from Jair Alexander and Rasul Douglas to Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Green Bay's defense is solid, but the Jets' defense is a problem in a good way. Devontae Adams was obviously a different breed with Green Bay, but Garrett Wilson is a pretty good comparison. You're talking Offensive Rookie of the Year with a Zach Wilson and Mike White and Joe Flacco throwing him the ball. Hey, all respect to Flacco though, he's a Super Bowl MVP. Can't say he didn't reach the top at one point. Pair Wilson with Allen Lazard, who's a better receiver than I think he's given credit for, and you have a top-tier duo. Oh, and one more thing, Mecole Hardman is there too, but he won't be there for long because he just teleported 50 yards downfield for a touchdown. Yeah, that man's fast. One of the fastest in the league. When did Rodgers have a true deep threat? Better yet, who was Rodgers' fastest receiver? Jordy Nelson? Randall Cobb? Surely I'm missing someone. That's not an issue anymore. The Jets have Hardman. Tyler Conklin is a solid tight end who doesn't even get mentioned because the Jets have so many weapons. Going from receivers to running backs, there's still greatness. Breece Hall was on pace to break 1,000 yards and probably would have been Offensive Rookie of the Year. Michael Carter is a great change of pace back who's been reliable on every down, and Zonovan Knight was a surprise star late in the year. Don't take this for granted, Jets fans. It's time. Do you realize in the Jets' history of existence, Aaron Rodgers will be the greatest player to play for you when cleat touches turf in September? I didn't even mention the offensive line who's getting Mekhi Becton back, Vera Tucker in his second year, the potential to grab another tackle in the draft. It's looking up for those guys too. There's nothing we can predict and know for sure it'll happen. You can wish the worst on something or someone and the best could happen. You could wish the best on something or someone and the worst could happen. I'm sorry it took all these years, but I just thought you should know. All those prayers you thought you wasted must have finally made their way through. In the wise words of Theo Von, nothing changes if nothing changes. Well, it's finally changed. Just like that, one night you're average, the next morning you're writing home about a possible Super Bowl. Like I said, it's never for sure, but this is the closest I've felt sure of anything when it comes to the Jets. Rodgers is going to be 40 soon, but in sports, age is just a number, and number 12 is coming for number 2.